placing the leaders of a country that went into battle to protect its civilians in the same line with bloodthirsty terrorists is moral blindness.
Does my right honourable friend agree that this is a grotesque overreach by the ICC?
A Supreme Court which is respected internationally and which the ICC is supposed to respect, and yet there are people in here who from day one have done very little to call out some of the other behaviour and everything to hold Israel to a standard they do not hold others to. That is why the Czech Prime Minister and the...
Can you... Please, can everybody focus on a question?
Chair this Select Committee, Alicia Kearns.
Mr. Speaker, my condolences go out to all the families who've received the most devastating news over the last few days that their loved ones have been murdered, and also to the Popperwell family who have received heinous treatment from Hamas with the publication of that outrageous video. Last week, the committee pushed the Minister for the Middle East to do more to get proof of life for those who are being held hostage, and that remains the call from our committee. Can I welcome the effort on the maritime ports? It is good that that is now in place. However, it will be unable to function come September due to the changes in the tide that will then come in. So this is a short-term solution. Since the 6th of May, when the Rafah offensive started, there have been only 40 trucks that have gone in through the Kerem-Shalom crossing. In Rafah, no fuel has gone in, no medical evacuations have taken place, as aid agencies have started to suspend sending in their own people. And that is extremely concerning. So my question is, when will the Rafah crossing reopen? And will the Erez West crossing finally accept aid not just through Jordan, but also through Ramallah? Because otherwise the amount of aid needed is just not going to get in.
Well, I thank the chair of the Select Committee for her remarks. She made the point, I think, before about proof of life, and as she knows, this is something which my noble friend Lord Ahmed has been pursuing in direct response, I think, to her committee. She makes the very good point, Mr. Speaker, that the maritime option will only go on for as long as the sea conditions are satisfactory. And that emphasises the importance of getting aid in by road, one of Britain's specific demands of the Israeli government. And she points out that Rafah has effectively been closed for the last few weeks, and the great difficulties that that causes. And we hope very much that there will soon be a deal between Egypt and Israel to put that right.
We come to SNP spokesperson Brendan O'Hara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We go down a dangerous road, Minister, if we believe that the rule of law is something from which a government can pick and choose. So, unlike the government, we very much welcome the decision of the International Criminal Court to issue arrest warrants for the Hamas leaders Sinwar, al-Masari and Haniyeh for crimes against humanity and war crimes committed on and subsequent to October the 7th. We have always unreservedly condemned the appalling Hamas attacks, their murders and their hostage-taking, and we repeat our calls for the immediate release of the hostages. Given the ferociously disproportionate Israeli response, one which has seen 35,000 dead, 100,000 injured, tens of thousands of children orphaned, a civilian infrastructure in ruins, the cutting off of food, water, electricity and medical supplies, we also welcome the ICC filing applications for the arrest warrants of both the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the Minister of Defence Yoav Gallant for war crimes and crimes against humanity. The ICC say they have evidence, including interviews with survivors and eyewitnesses, which show that Israel has intentionally and systematically deprived the civilian population of Gaza with what they need to survive. And they refer specifically to Israel using starvation as a weapon of war and intentionally directing attacks against the civilian population, all acts which constitute a crime against humanity. The ICC has confirmed everything that we have said about the crimes of October the 7th and Israel's use of a collective punishment and ethnic cleansing in response to those crimes. For 8 months, this government has told us that it cannot make an assessment on breaches of international humanitarian law, but it has today, because it suits them, made an immediate assessment on the decision of the International Criminal Court whose panel of experts is predominantly made up of UK lawyers, and they've done so simply because it doesn't agree with it. It is shameful and unforgivable that for 8 months this government has chosen to deny the evidence of their own eyes and given political cover and munitions to Israel. And we have to assume that if today doesn't put an end to the UK licence of arms export to Israel, then sadly, absolutely nothing will.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the position is simply not in respect of the ICC, as the honourable gentleman set out. And the ICC has done nothing of the sort in what he described. He suggested that they had already found the answer to these allegations, had already exercised their answer. And the truth is that the pre-trial chamber now needs to consider the evidence and then reach a judgment. So let us not jump through all these hoops at once when they are simply not there to be jumped through. He also asks, as indeed did the Shadow Foreign Secretary, about whether we are playing fast and loose with the rule of law. We are certainly not, and I hope that he will attend the main debate today when he will see exactly what the government thinks about the rule of law in all cases. And just because you support the role of the ICC does not mean you have to be devoid of a view on what it is saying, and the government is giving its view. And as I said, Mr. Speaker, we do not believe that seeking warrants will get the hostages out, get aid in, or deliver a sustainable ceasefire, and that remains the UK priority.
Sir Julian Lewis.
This question is in my personal capacity, Mr. Speaker, not as Chairman of the ISC. In general, I am a strong supporter of the work of the ICC. The terrorist attack was undoubtedly designed to provoke an overreaction by the Israelis and to polarize societies, and it has succeeded in both those aims. May I encourage the Minister to encourage the House in turn to read the ICC's statement in full. It's helpfully available online. And may I urge people with a partisan view on either side of this atrocious issue to take on board seriously what the ICC is saying about the activities of the side they support as well as the side they oppose.
Mr. Speaker, I think my right honourable friend makes a good point about ensuring that the debate is informed by facts and not by rhetoric.
Don Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Minister, I'm a little bit confused. The government has previously said that they will not endorse any military operation into Rafah because that would be against international law. The Minister today said that unless there was a very clear plan of how to protect people and save lives, what's changed?
Mr. Speaker, nothing has changed at all. We have repeatedly made clear that we cannot support an attack on Rafah without seeing a detailed plan. Clearly, that means a constructive plan which abides by IHL on all counts.
Sir Michael Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree that this is a grotesque overreach by the ICC? Courts must also act within the rule of law. And the jurisdiction of a court is something that it is not for itself to judge. The Statute of Rome, which set up the International Criminal Court, clearly delineated the powers of the court. The US and the UK have both previously said that the ICC does not have jurisdiction. Under its founding charter, it can only act against a sovereign state, which is a signatory. The US and Israel are not signatories. Dozens of other countries are not signatories, and Gaza is not a sovereign state. So, putting aside for a moment any purported evidence, the court does not have jurisdiction, and like any other court, like a traffic court or a magistrate's court, it has to act within its powers, the powers set up for it by the international community. So isn't it true that the ICC is acting out with its powers and setting itself up sadly, as a political court.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I made clear what our position is towards the ICC, but in respect of what my right honourable and learned friend says, I think that many people will agree with what Benny Gantz said this morning. And he said the following: placing the leaders of a country that went into battle to protect its civilians in the same line with bloodthirsty terrorists is moral blindness.
Sir George Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many of us on all sides of this House have supported the right of Israel to exist and consequently the right of Israel to defend itself over many years. And we've also condemned the appalling atrocities that were carried out by Hamas on October the 7th. But as the Right Honourable Gentleman said in his statement, after 7 months of fighting, it's becoming difficult to imagine the realisation of a lasting peace. And I agree with him with that. But doesn't he agree with me that until Israel realises that it has to listen to those friends in this House and around the world and take responsibility for its own actions, then our support for them is declining rapidly.
That's absolutely right.
Well, the right honourable gentleman, I think, accepts that Israel has the right of self-defence, but it must exercise it within international humanitarian law. And he makes the point, which I think is so important, that we have to lift people's eyes to what a future settlement based on a two-state solution looks like when this appalling catastrophe is over. And a great deal of work is going on behind the scenes with regional partners, with great powers and through the United Nations to try and make sure we can lift people's eyes and that there is a deal to be done which at long last would draw the poison from this terrible situation.
Andy Percy.
Mr Deputy Speaker, facts are important, and the facts have not changed since October the 7th, which is that it is Hamas who embed themselves in civilian areas and use civilian infrastructures and put their own people at risk in this conflict. It is Hamas who have committed rapes as a weapon of war. It is Hamas who are still holding innocent civilians hostages, and it is Hamas who went into Israeli communities on October the 7th and butchered 1,200 people, including slicing the breasts of women and the limbs of children. On the other side, we have the democratic, liberal state of Israel with an independent judicial process, a Supreme Court which is respected internationally and which the ICC is supposed to respect. And yet there are people in here who from day one have done very little to call out some of the other behaviour and everything to hold Israel to a standard they do not hold others to. That is why the Czech Prime Minister and the...
Can you... Please, can everybody focus on a question? Focus on a question. Because I'm not quite sure I heard a question there, but nonetheless, I think the Minister has had enough to respond. Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend speaks with great passion and feeling on this subject. And he, I think, will be one of those who, I said, might well agree with what Benny Gantz has said this morning. And I read into the record exactly what he said. And I think there will be large numbers of people, both in this place and outside, who will think that what Benny Gantz said made a lot of sense.
Richard Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Cyprus Maritime Corridor is welcome, but it risks acting as a fig leaf for the fact that there is not enough aid getting into Gaza. The Kelowna report found that Israeli authorities have yet to provide proof of their claims that UN staff in Gaza are involved in terrorist organisations. For the supply of aid to those Palestinians in Gaza who are innocent, the UN Relief and Works Agency is the only serious organisation capable of it. Yeah. Why won't the British government follow the lead of our Australian, Canadian and European allies and reinstate funding to UNRWA? Yeah.
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for his comment. As far as the maritime access is concerned, he is right that the best solution always, from the beginning of this, has been access by road. That is by far the easiest and quickest way and least expensive way of getting aid to desperate people. And so he is entirely correct about that. In respect of the Kelowna report, I can say that we are still waiting for the OIOS report from the United Nations, and I'm advised that there has been good cooperation between the United Nations and the Israeli authorities on that. And on UNRWA, as I've said, we are waiting for that report. The House, I think, should expect that we will be restoring funding to make sure that humanitarian support is available through that mechanism. But he, I'm sure, will reflect upon the appalling events which were revealed about members of UNRWA staff, and we must complete the process which I set out.
Richard Graham.
Deputy Speaker, the Israeli War Cabinet looks divided. Chief of Staff is pressing for a day-after strategy. The Defence Minister has outlined his concerns, and the former Defence Minister and Chief of Staff, Benny Gantz, has asked to see the government's post-war plan for Gaza Strip with 6 strategic goals, all of which, and perhaps my right honourable friend would care to comment, look very similar to those that he has outlined as our own goals. The former Defence Minister has threatened to resign if the plan isn't announced by June the 8th. Is he going to have to resign, or are there chances that there will be a plan which both he and us could agree with?
Well, I very much hope my honourable friend is correct in saying, and indeed hoping, that there will be a plan, Mr Deputy Speaker. And what he shows in his perceptive question is that there are many voices in Israel. And the fact that he quoted 2 such senior figures, one seeking to know what the day after strategy is, and the other one wanting to see a post-war plan, underlines the response which I gave a moment ago to the other side of the House, that we have to lift people's eyes to the fact that this dreadful conflict will come to an end, and we will then need to have a plan to ensure that the future is very different from the past. And I remind the House that the tremendous progress that was made in Oslo at the Oslo Accords took place on the back of the Intifada. So out of great darkness we must ensure that a proper plan comes forth.
Sana Begum.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can the Minister explain how this government can possibly justify continuing to support a military campaign that has involved denying civilians electricity and basic services, the starving of civilians and blocking of aid, the bombing of civilian infrastructure, the forced displacement of millions, the killing of journalists and aid workers, and the killing of civilians, including large numbers of children, on an unprecedented scale?
Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, we don't support that. What we support is Israel's right of self-defence, but it must be carried out within international humanitarian law.
James Sunderland.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I think there's a danger from the scope and the timing of the ICC arrest warrants that somehow moral equivalence might be implied, but it is quite clear that the fighting should stop. Can I please ask the Minister what he thinks the impact will be of those warrants?
Well, my honourable friend makes a most interesting point. This smacks of an unworthy, indeed ludicrous, sense of moral equivalence between a murderous, prescribed terrorist organisation and the democratically elected government of Israel, seeking to protect its citizens and recover its 124 remaining hostages.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I think when we are talking about the role of the ICC, it's not about whether it's moral, it's about making sure a democratic state falls within the rule of international law. As 35,000, as it's estimated, 35,000 people have been killed, 132 hostages are still held. The Arab League have now called for an immediate ceasefire, deployment of a UN peacekeeping force in the West Bank until a 2-state solution is negotiated. Will the Deputy Foreign Secretary answer my right honourable friend's, the member for Tottenham's question, which he failed to, in terms of that offensive in Rafah, and will we join our American allies in responding and stopping all war components being sold?
Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that is not what the American government has done. They have suspended one shipment, but they have not stopped any of the other supply. And in the first part of her question, the government continues to seek a pause in the fighting, which can lead to a sustained ceasefire, and also get the hostages out and aid in.
Tobias Selwood.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Deputy Foreign Secretary speaks about a ceasefire, speaks about getting the hostages out, speaks about getting the aid in, and talks to resume. But can I ask him to address the bigger picture? Because behind Hezbollah, behind the Houthis and behind Hamas sits Iran, arming and training these extremist non-state actors. And as much as we debate the possible long-term governance and security solutions for Gaza, they are unlikely to stand the test of time until the challenge of Iran's disruptive proxy influence across the Middle East is challenged. Now, Iran's destabilising foreign policy is determined by the President, by the Supreme Leader, and by the Foreign Minister. Two of those three were killed in a helicopter crash on the weekend. It's clear for Iran to determine who replaces those. But can I ask whether we can advance our own robust policy to stand up to Iran's proxy influence? Otherwise, we will never secure lasting peace in Gaza.
Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, my right honourable friend, the former chairman of the Defence Select Committee, is right about the malign influence of Iran through its proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas and the Houthis, on the situation in the Middle East. And we hope that Iran will cease to disrupt in the way that it does through its proxies. And it may well be that the events of the weekend offer an opportunity for a reset.
Justin Madders.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. As I understand the government's position on the International Criminal Court, it's because Israel were not a signatory to the original treaty and because Palestine is not a sovereign state. They don't believe that they have jurisdiction. Well, I think that leads us to a place where anyone can opt out of the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court at any time. I think that's a terrible place for us to be as a government and a country. But if he doesn't agree with that, will he at least agree with me that the letter from the 12 senators from the United States to the ICC, where they said, target Israel and we will target you and we will make sure all American support for the ICC is withdrawn, is not a place this government will ever be in?
Well, of course, the Americans are not a member of the court, whereas the United Kingdom is. But the point the honourable gentleman makes is an important one, because in this debate about these terrible events and the appalling consequences which have resulted, it is important that everyone chooses their language with care.
Stephen Crabb.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Deputy Foreign Minister rightly draws attention to the false moral equivalence inherent in the ICC statement between the actions of sovereign democratic Israel and the most brutal activities of a terrorist organisation. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that that false moral equivalence is always drawn by the enemies of Israel as a way to delegitimise the Jewish state? And does he share my concern with this move by the IEC, not just because of the succour that it gives terrorist groups elsewhere around the world, but the risks within it for ourselves and our own troops as they go about defending our interests around the world?
Well, my right honourable friend expresses himself, as always, with great lucidity. And I think it's very important that that message does not get sent. And that is why I repeated what Benny Gantz had said, and also in response to our honourable friend, who is no longer in his place, why I think that the sense of moral equivalence is repugnant.
She Onwara.
On April the 5th, the Foreign Secretary called for an independent inquiry into Israel's killing of 7 aid workers, including 3 Britons. Now, I have repeatedly raised Israel, and particularly the IDF's lack of accountability and examples of misconduct with the Minister, and it is clear that here, as in other areas, the government is backtracking on the limited assurances given, despite investigations from the BBC, amongst others, showing IDF misconduct continues despite pledges and commitments to the contrary from Israel. So, will the Minister say yes or no? Does he believe that Israel should investigate itself regardless of the horrors committed?
Well, as the Honourable Lady will know, Israel has a rule of law and has the ability to investigate these matters, but she is entirely correct to say that the Foreign Secretary made clear we expect an independent, a detailed independent investigation. Israel has taken a number of steps. She will have seen the acts that were taken against those who were responsible for the decisions made in those attacks. And she will be pleased to know that we are considering with our allies the best way to inject further independence into that investigation.
Logan.
Mr. Speaker, my constituents in Bolton today are livid because they have seen through the International Criminal Court that there is evidence that acts committed to use starvation as method of war and violence, evidence that collectively punishing the civilian population of Gaza, and evidence that Israel has intentionally and systematically deprived the civilian population in all parts of Gaza of objects indispensable to human survival. Never mind being on the right side of history, will we ensure that we're on the right side of the present?
Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the fact that the prosecutor has applied for arrest warrants to be issued does not directly impact, for example, on UK licensing decisions, but we will continue to monitor developments as part of our assessment process. And once again, I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman who acts